Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Today, our topic of discussion is actually a very important one, especially for the Iranian American community, and is the essentials of both immigration and OFAC or sanctions regulations, because there's such an overlap with these different areas of law. For a lot of people who are looking to immigrate to the United States, they need to bring their assets here. When they fill out the forms for the government, they need to know what to report and what not to report. And it's very important that you do that in a way that satisfies both the immigration requirements as well as you're doing it in a way that doesn't implicate you when it comes to sanctions. On top of that, we have Iranians who are just confused about whether or not they can come here. So today I'm very excited to welcome one of my dear friends, John Khosravy, who is an immigration expert, amazing attorney, and has some great content to answer your immigration questions on his social media, which is all in the post. So welcome, John. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Mehrnoush John. Appreciate it.
And so I'm going to dive right into it because it's confusing. Tell us about these travel bans. What is what? Is there still a travel ban? What is going on? How many different bans are there? Because I know Iranians are extra special, so they really get to be in every ban that ever existed.
Yeah, there's multiple bans. So when one goes down, there's two that pop up. So that's there. But in general, the cases still can go forward. And that's one of the main problems with all nationalities that we've had since COVID-19 hit is they think immigration is completely stopped. But USCIS, the Immigration Department, is accepting petitions, applications. So if you're filing for your brother or sister, parent, spouse, children, or employment, you can still start the paperwork. And a big chunk of the time is that portion. And the Immigration Department, USCIS, claims that so many people thought that is closed. The applications being submitted were cut down by 50%. So it's half of the amount of applications they usually get, they received. And because of that, they claim, and I keep saying they claim because I don't really believe them, but they say that funding has almost gone dry. So they almost went bankrupt last month. And they're on kind of, they decided not to close down completely, or at least not furlough most of their employees. But the thing is, you can start cases. The problem was ending them. And so there's several different travel bans. There's general ones, for example, COVID-19. So if you've been to a country that the US puts on a list for COVID-19, like China, Brazil, Iran, Schengen, European countries, Britain, and Ireland, then if you visit in the last 2 weeks, you cannot come to the United States unless you fall within one of the exceptions. And each one of those separate proclamations or bans the president put on has little nuanced differences in who is subject to an exception or not. And there's always waivers that you can request. Like I got a waiver for a UK national who was banned from coming in, and she was doing law enforcement work. So I was able to get a waiver for it. But it's a nightmare for Iranians in particular, because not only do they have this COVID-19 travel ban, they have the old travel ban, one of the original ones that said you can't come if you're Iranian. We do background checks. Before COVID-19 happened, around the end of 2019, around September-ish, that one sort of eased up. They created a better system to vet people. So I was getting on-the-spot approvals for parents of U.S. citizens and spouses for the most part. I had one case where a green card holder who had a wife and kid, the wife immediately got the visa, and the kid who was 19, it took 6 months for them to get the visa. So there's no consistency that you would think, okay, they're a child, they don't have any military history. It was a young girl too. So it's like, there's no consistency, but they are getting approved. But then there's next level stuff that's popping up. So the COVID-19 ban still is there. I have one client who got their immigrant visa. That means they went to the embassy, they were approved, and they were going to get on the plane. They're going to the airport to come to the United States. Right at that time, the new travel ban for COVID-19 hit Iran. They wouldn't let him on the plane. So he's been waiting and waiting for this to clear up, and his immigrant visa expired, so he can't come to the United States because his visa expired. So we're contacting the embassy to do a new one. And the embassy he was dealing with was in the UAE, Abu Dhabi. And so we're like, hey, could he come and get a new one? He said, well, the United Arab Emirates is not accepting Iranians. So unless you show us he has a visa to come here, we're not going to schedule an interview for him to get a new visa. I said, okay. So we contacted UAE, and UAE says that we won't give a visa unless you have an appointment scheduled with the embassy. And so all of a sudden we're like, wait, what are you talking about? And so it's very frustrating stuff like that. And it's really important for people to know that if you get a green card approved at the embassy, it doesn't mean you have a green card. That stamp in your passport is called an immigrant visa. Until you touch down within the United States, you do not have a green card. It's just a visa to be able to enter the United States to get the green card. And so these travel bans affect people that are immigrant visa holders. And so you're hit by that really hard if you haven't had your case not only approved, but enter the United States before these dates.
Oh, that's great. That's good. I mean, it is so confusing. And I definitely do feel like there is this misconception of, well, we can't, especially Iranians, well, we can't come to the United States, or it's not worth it. Yeah, I'm sure there are certain cases with the different travel bans, depending on what your case is, it perhaps may not make sense for you to start it now, or it's not going to, you need to get that information. But it's now more important than ever to understand what your personal rights are in your case. And I'm sure you get this a lot, where someone calls and expects there to be a very clean answer for every question, or just a generalization of facts. And I feel like that's not the case, that you need to know exactly what is happening, what's in that person's background, where they are, what they're applying for, what they're looking for. And it is individual to individual.
Yeah. I mean, law is just like that. It's like I always tell clients, sometimes they don't like it when people call me. I said, you can't call a doctor and say I'm coughing. Is it, a sore throat, or is it cancer? It's like, I have to do tests and learn about your family history and all that kind of stuff. Immigration itself has always been really unique, because one little factor could be a problem. Add to that President Trump's administration, add to that, especially being an Iranian, the problems I have with that. And it's worse. So let me give you two other travel bans that exist for Iranians that most people are not aware of, even immigration attorneys. One is, they started denying every person that has any involvement with Sepah, which is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, as of January. So if you had conscription or Sarbazi 30 years ago, in 1980 and 1990, for 2 years, they will deny your case at the embassy interview. So it's better not to move forward. If you have a case that's pending there, hold on it until the situation clears up and we know that they're not going to deny you. Because if you go there and they deny you, you just wasted everything. You have to restart from zero again. And another ban that came out in January was this really wild ban that we haven't seen how it's going to play out, because the shutdowns happened for COVID-19. But the administration said, essentially, because Sepah, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, have so much control over the economy of of Iran, that if you're in the mining sector, if you're in the textile sector, and if you're in the construction sector, and one other sector, I forgot which one it is, you're banned from coming. And it's just general. So when you say construction, does that mean a person making a tower or bridge that's 50 stories tall? Rich person, probably they have some relationship, maybe. Or are you talking about the person who's putting bricks on there or not too? That they're in construction. But that's all they said, construction. And so that gives wide latitude to deny chunks of the economy, because textiles is a carpet salesman or a guy who sells T-shirts included in that. Or maybe it's just an honest person who just has a factory that makes socks. So we don't know the answers to this, because as soon as this ban happened, the embassy shut down for COVID-19, and we don't have any examples. So there's just so many different factors you might have, and they look at your history potentially. So it's really hard to answer all of these, and there are no answers. And that's not even getting to the public charge rule, which I'm not sure if we want to open that bag up, but that's this new thing too that Trump added. So it's a lot of unknowns. It's definitely worth doing. If you want to start your parents' case, you might as well. If you're married or you're engaged, you might as well bring your fiance or spouse or start the process, because you're in love. There's nothing you can do about it. But just be prepared for massive problems. And I'm going to get into one that just started today, is announced, which is just wild. That's going to affect the whole world. If you have any questions, let me know. This one's really scary, the one I'm about to talk about.
I don't know if I feel like I'm in Kauai. It's too early for me to grab a drink, but it seems like I need it for this. I don't know.
I think they look so beautiful there too. But they snuck in a regulation that comes into place today. And I've just been in shock, so I didn't want to read the whole thing, but I read the headlines of it. They made it so that the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, this is the group that's in charge of medical care and certain medical stuff in the United States, in particular COVID-19 response. I think Dr. Fauci or someone related, so I'm not sure exactly. But they said they and the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, could designate a country a risk for this kind of pandemic kind of virus and shut down immigration from that country completely. And so Iran being one of the countries who's big hit on this, China, these are massive bans that could happen that just shuts it down. And one line in there is kind of crazy. They said if one of your cohorts is already in the United States, they could just remove them. So if someone's here on a work visa and the spouse is overseas, they come and kick out that person who's already here. That doesn't make any sense. So there's going to be lawsuits on this. And today is just when the regulation power comes in. And it's not really in the news. It's one of those behind the scenes stuff that happens so many times when these groundbreaking kind of illegal and immoral kind of rules come into place. So it's just scary. And this is, I think these kind of stuff were happening even before the current administration. It's just the nature of the bureaucracy and the power grabs that are happening right now in Washington. It's a very scary situation.
It's unbelievable, because I feel that so much of this of the regulations that we're seeing is as if it's really not thought out. Is as if they're making it with these abstract individuals or people in mind without really realizing you have, millions of people that have ties between these countries that you're designating or you're, grouping and putting in this ban. And it's as if they're not really thinking, how is this going to affect all these people? How is this going to affect US persons that have ties to these countries, which is a question that comes up a lot whenever they hear the travel ban. So what happens if you're a legal permanent resident, or what happens if you're a citizen of the United States and you're traveling back and forth between, for example, let's say Iran, well, two questions. One is geared at, is there exceptions to these bans that permit travel, especially the ones that are restricting due to COVID or the pandemic? Or do they apply to citizens and green card holders or not? Because that's a question everybody always gets because they get panicked.
So the COVID-19 travel bans do not apply to citizens and green card holders, although there's been rumors that they want to even block citizens from coming out. It's illegal. How are you going to block a citizen from coming home? So that doesn't apply. But let's say you are the spouse, a foreign spouse that's not a citizen or green card holder, but you have a U.S. spouse that is. Spouse of U.S. citizens are normally, almost all of them are exceptions to this ban, but spouses of green card holders are not. So if you're a green card holder and you start the green card case and these bans are existing, the spouse won't have an exemption until you naturalize and become a citizen, then the exception will kick in. But green card holders themselves are not that they aren't trying. When the original travel ban under President Trump came in, they wrote it so bad. I joke around. I say it's almost as if a drunk person wrote this, that the way it was worded, it was banning green card holders essentially. And so a lot of, and so within 24, 48 hours, they try to fix that up. But a lot of people were stuck at the borders. A lot of people were in detention until they cleared that up. And it's come out that the legal counsel for the White House didn't even review these. They kind of just wrote them and then handed it to the Department of Homeland Security and the State Department. And that was the first they saw was when we saw it. So no coordination, just wild stuff. It's very unprofessional is the lightest way to put it.
Energy that gets wasted trying to correct something after the fact is horrible. What a horrible time to be in love with a non-US person, I think. I mean, come on, it's not easy. So another question that we get a lot of is obviously because of COVID and travel restrictions, a lot of green card holders who were outside of the United States ended up being stuck there for periods longer than 6 months. First question is, can you just review, because I do know that a lot of people make the mistake of using a green card as a travel document, and that's not what this is intended for. So can you please review what a green card should be used when you travel, what the limitations and restrictions on travel is, and also if you exceed those time periods, what can happen, and how do you still prove your intent to reside here in the United States if you're a green card holder and you're traveling abroad and you get stuck outside there?
Yeah, that's such an important question because it is used almost as a tourist visa for a lot of people. And in the past, they're pretty flexible on that, and they still are, but you could expect that to stop pretty soon if it hasn't already. So a green card essentially says, in fact, it says you're a lawful permanent resident of the United States, which means you're residing, living in America. You shouldn't be living outside. Now, sometimes people, when they get their green card, they're not that ready to just move on. And so I've seen flexibility on that if it takes a little bit of time. But essentially, once you get a green card, you should be leaving the United States, have an address here, have a bank account, and live life fully that you're here. And if you leave, it's only for vacation purposes. If you're outside the United States for more than 180 days on a green card, and between 180 days and 1 year, if you're coming back to the United States, that opens it up where they can, at the port of entry, which is usually an airport or a land port, it opens it up where they could ask you questions about what you're doing, where you've been, and it just make it tough for you. They could do that. They could say, okay, you're considered a returning resident, applicant for admission, which opens it up for them to question stuff. And historically, they never do that, very rarely. And even if they did, it's not that big a deal. But there's this new public charge we mentioned earlier, which says if you're coming to the United States, you have to be able to financially support yourself. So that comes into play when you're applying for the green card and you get the green card. However, if you're outside the United States for 180 days or more, they could ask you about your finances when you're returning. Now, I've talked with several airports and stuff. If they've instituted that policy to question people, they say they have not, but they have the right to do that. And so even though it's not their policy, an individual officer can just take it on themselves to start questioning you about your finances and say, oh, you're a mom of a U.S. citizen, you're very sick, you have these diseases, you constantly go to the doctor, you might end up having taxpayers pay for your hospital bill, we don't want to let you in. They have the power to do that. And when you spend 180 days outside the United States, you give them that authority. Now, again, I've never seen it used. They have the authority though. And so as a lawyer, I always have to think about the worst case scenario. But the 180 days to 1 year usually are flexible. Once you pass a year, there's assumption that you've abandoned your status, you've given up your green card. Now, a lot of attorneys scare the hell out of their clients about this. In practicality, what I've seen is they're never really harsh on this. I've seen people be out 1 or 2 years even. Although, let me say is clearly, you're not supposed to be out 1 year. I do not recommend it. And you have an easy way of losing your green card if you're out 1 year. But they could be flexible. It's up to the officer's determination on reentry, what they think. And the main thing for you to show is that the reason you went outside was for temporary reasons. So it was maybe unexpected it goes that far, that you have a life here, you have a utility bill, you have a phone bill, you have a lease agreement, that your life is here. And so when you're outside, the intent wasn't to be outside. You have an explanation. Many times as people go outside, they break their leg, a family member dies. Be able to document that to show it was unexpected and that my life is in the United States so you can maintain and keep the green card. Now, a lot of people are stuck outside for COVID-19. They're human beings that work, at these airports and stuff. They're not bad people, most of them, vast majority of them. I know a lot of the managers and head people. They're good people. So they have understanding for COVID-19. But if you're already out for 9 months and then COVID-19 hit and you're out for additional 6 months, they could question and say, well, what are you doing? Why are you out for this long? You just got to be reasonable about it. And if you have multiple trips, even of 5 months, because people think, okay, I'll come at the 5.5 month mark, I'll come for 2 days and go back. They have these flight travel history. They know it. And if you keep doing that, they could still assume that you abandon your status and hassle you. So don't do that. Unfortunately, some people have to do that, but it could all be problematic. I do want to talk about reentry permits in a moment and the effect on citizenship. Because let's say you keep the green card, let you in, it does mess up citizenship for sure, though. But I have a question.
I wrote those down right here, so we're very in sync. Okay, good. So I don't even have to ask.
Perfect. So
I do want to ask one thing before you move on. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but this is so important because this does happen a lot where I don't know if back in the day, years and years ago, if they didn't keep travel records and people could just really come and say, oh, I was recently here, it wasn't that long, or they give these can you really hammer home the fact that that just doesn't work anymore? They have these records, they look at it, and they're gonna want to know why you keep coming and going. Right.
Back in the day when it seemed like they had no records, I do a Freedom of Information Act request, which is requesting a FOIA request from the government. And I see they have records in the 80s and 90s when you're coming and going. They just were, frankly, too lazy to look at it. You just got lucky. But they for sure know everything. I'm surprised because people sometimes play games. They leave by a car. Canada will tell the United States. Right. European countries, Canada, Australia, and many other countries. Part of they share information. Part of this travel ban that started against Iran and a lot of Muslim majority countries, frankly, are mostly allies of Iran. So Yemen, Syria, Iraq was there for saying they took them away. In it wrote, if a country does not share information with the United States, they're going to be put on this travel ban. So what I'm seeing nowadays is people from Nigeria all of a sudden have an officer knock on their door, try to deport them. And like, how did you even know this person was here? Because they moved around a couple of times. Well, the guy renewed his passport with the embassy in Nigeria, and they knew the U.S. address, and they told the U.S. government. So now this applies to a lot of countries. China, Iran typically do not share information. I guess the U.S. can't really fully travel ban China because of economic consequences. But it just goes to show the travel ban against Iran will never leave because Iran's never going to share information like that. But for the most part, if you're traveling, if you have a flight that stops in Turkey, if you have a flight that stops in Amsterdam or London, you're on records and they know when you're coming and going. The U.S. has everything. So you should always assume they have 100% of the information, plus some additional information that's wrong even, that's going to work against you. So you got to be very cautious of this stuff. There's no hiding anything. And lying will only hurt you because that could lead to deportation and complete bans on reentry to the United States.
Okay, and then sorry I interrupted you. You were going to explain the impact that staying outside the United States for long periods of time when you are a legal permanent resident or you have a green card can have when you're applying for citizenship. Yeah,
this is such an important thing because especially for Iranians, they want to add up those days to get citizenship. Well, waiting 5 years or 3 years if you're married to a U.S. citizen, and just one of the requirements, and physically being in the United States for half of that time, something like 914 days or something like that. Don't quote me, I just give or take a couple of days. It's just one of the eligibility requirements. So there's physical presence requirement that you physically have to be in the United States for that much time. But there's also continuous presence. And continuous presence means you're living here and you're not outside the United States for sure not more than a year, most of the time not more than 6 months, but even multiple absences of 5 or 4 months at a time can lead to a denial of US citizenship. You have to be able to show if you have multiple absences of 4 or 5 months or an absence of between 6 months and a year that you're actually living in the United States. It's documented that you're here, that you're living here, but you're outside for temporary reasons for some reason. And so if you play this game of coming every 5 months for 2 days or a couple months, this will come back at you because they know the travel history. And one thing President Trump's administration wants to do is right now they essentially only look at the last 5 years. They want to change the form to look back the last 10 years and just to be able to like see what's going on. So the forms are get much more complicated, which also goes to if you are thinking about applying for citizenship and you have a good case, apply for it now before it gets harder, because this form will just get longer and longer and they find more and more reasons to deny you. So that's really important to check.
And also,
but yeah,
changing the fees, correct?
It changed the fees. The fees are increasing, almost doubling October 2nd. So get on that if you want to do it. I think it's going to around 90% increase from like 750.
You're saying they were going bankrupt, so they're really going to make up for it.
Yeah. And you know, it's a way of preventing people from applying for citizenship, you know. And if there's an error in the case, like I had one case where this guy was here the whole time. The officer said, no, you're outside for 2 years. And he's like, what? They just made something up. And then we have to appeal that. The appeal for that was right now costs like $500 or $600. They want to make it cost like $1,500, $2,000 to appeal that. I didn't appeal it. I filed a complaint, and I every day was calling and writing letters and congressional people until they fixed it on their own because the error was so egregious. I said it's not fair to charge this guy, have him wait 6 months to have a hearing to try to fix this error that was so bad that they should just fix it on their own like that. And they did. They did it on the 29th day. So we have a 30-day period for filing appeal. On the 29th day, they fixed it. And so, but yeah, you got to be careful. And really, you know, a lot of times I tell people consult with an attorney. And even in our community, Iranians say, oh, you're trying to scare people into hiring you to steal money, this and that. You'd be surprised what things happen in naturalization, the citizenship process, that's problematic that you would never even expect. The rules are so weirdly written and mistakes that happen. Always have a consultation with a lawyer that's going to go in detail. Not a lawyer that's a 10-minute consultation if people want. They just ask about stuff. When I have a consultation about citizenship, I go from the time you're born and follow the life history to try to spot issues because all that can be used against you. So you got to look at how you got your green card, what you're doing before that, after that, your travel history. I remember a colleague had a case where the guy was married to a U.S. citizen, got the green card like that, and then they did research at the citizenship stage to realize his wife was married to a guy before that, and that guy was married to another woman. Their divorce was never proper, so that marriage for them was never proper, which made their marriage never proper. And they went like 4 levels down and found this out. I don't know why they would spend the time to do that, but you know, it's wild. And you know, even a consultation, that'd be something possible for me to figure out. But it's that deep that they can get into. Then there's always taxation issues. You have to pay all your taxes since becoming a U.S. person, and a lot of people don't pay those taxes. There's OFAC violations are crimes. So there's a question on naturalization citizenship to ask, have you ever committed a crime you haven't caught for? And that's an issue. There's questions about if you use public services by fraud, said a lie to get some sort of government benefit. And a lot of people don't realize when you do a family-based immigration case, you have a financial sponsor that says, I'm going to take care of you and pay your bills, which includes, you know, going to the hospital. So if you come to the United States and get some sort of medical benefit that the government pays for, but you don't include that sponsor's income as your income, which will make you ineligible to get the free benefit, then you're committing a fraud. And historically, they would never ask about that, but that's one of the new ambitions of this administration, that they're starting to look into this stuff. They even yesterday announced that they created an agency to start hunting down people who are getting public benefits. And I'm kind of lose track of what I want to talk first, but it's wild, the stuff that's happening. It makes it hard to practice for me. Like, it's emotionally draining. Like, just talking about stuff, I'm like, oh my God, like there's so much going on. It makes life so hard for people.
It's changing, and you know, you're trying really hard to create order for your clients and something that is chaotic. I mean, and you're dealing with this current administration right now that it really does want to limit immigration. It wants to send people back to their country of origin, and I think for us growing up here, this is, you know, you always felt that the laws here, the United States government was not the government that would do that. And sometimes it can be really disheartening when you're saying, oh my gosh, it's like any other government. There's an agenda and they want to move forward. But that's why I always tell people, it's not about creating fear, but there is a danger in not knowing what your rights are and just willy-nilly applying for things. We're just living in a different world now, obviously for many different reasons, but also the climate that we're living in, especially if you're Iranian. It's just important for you to understand what your rights are when it comes to immigration, when it comes to sanctions, because even things that may not at one point have been a big deal historically, or that do not seem like a big deal for you, can be a big deal. And that's why I'm sure you get this question a lot where people say, do I really need a lawyer to do this? And I always say, you know, like for OFAC, no, there's nothing that says you need to apply through a lawyer to do anything. But the truth is, one little small issue can create a big problem. And right now it's the same for immigration. And as you were saying, all of the fees you're paying, all of the energy, the resources, and time. I mean, time is money. The years it's taking, the months it takes for them to evaluate these cases, and one little thing isn't filled out correctly, or one little box isn't checked, or the information is, they'll deny it, your money goes to waste, and then you go to the back of the line, and you know, it's just not worth that risk. At least know what your rights are before you just send something to the government and apply for something, you know?
I have one case that's so sad. It was an Iranian woman who married a U.S. citizen and got a green card. And then she said, well, I have a green card now, I can apply for my children. So she had a daughter who was 12 and a son that was like 16 or something like that. She applied for them. By the time came for the son to have a green card, he got Saudis conscription, so he couldn't get a passport, leave the country. So he was stuck an additional 2 years. Then the son's father, the ex-husband of the wife, got cancer. So this guy stayed in Iran helping the dad. And then once the dad unfortunately passed away, then he wanted to come. The travel ban hit, so he's out. However, if at the beginning she had consulted with an attorney, because the son was under the age of 18 when the mother remarried with the second husband, who's a U.S. citizen, the stepfather could have applied for them, and the time that it took would have been cut in a quarter. So the stepdad could have got the stepson here in a year, or less than a year at that time, but through the mom, it was going to take 2 years. And because she didn't know that the new husband could file for him and did it on her own, the son got hit with, you know, Saudis, and then dad's cancer, and then travel ban. And now the kid's in his like mid-20s. We're just waiting because I don't want him to go to interview to get denied, have to restart everything all over again. And so he doesn't know, should I go study? Should I, you know, fall in love and get married here? Or am I going to go to the U.S.? His life in his key parts of his 20s has no idea what he's doing. And it's just because, you know, if she had just, you know, had a 10-minute conversation, just did some research online or something and had the stepdad do it. And that's having a professional is here for. Unfortunately, it is expensive. And you know, that's just a fact of it, but it's just like an investment.
You don't do it for free?
No, unfortunately. I would be talking 24/7 all day, every day for the rest of my life if I get free consultations.
I know you do a ton of work for free without charging a pro bono work, and it's just sometimes people, it's a lot, but I'm really grateful for you taking the time and doing even events and talks like this, and you do so much of this where you give people good free information that they can listen to and educate themselves, and at least decide, okay, if I can't afford to do it, at least is it a good time for me to do this? What is my case? What is my liability? Okay, so another question we get a lot, especially now, is that what if I had an immigrant visa and I couldn't come to the United States, which was a big problem, and it's expired? What happens in those cases?
Well, it's a massive situation. You have to get a new visa, so you have to schedule another appointment, and it's hard for a lot of countries. It's like Iranians have to go to embassies outside Iran, which they won't even allow Iranians in. Turkeys won't let you in unless there's special circumstances you can get. So you have to get a new visa, but you also need a new medical first, because that medical checkup you did for the green card visa is only valid for 6 months. So it's expired. You have to do a new medical, new appointment, and potentially you may be subject to administrative processing again. And people who have dealt with that know how much of a disaster that is. It's these background checks that they do. I once had a case that came to me. They had been waiting in administrative processing for 3 years. And it was a U.S. citizen woman with Iranian background. She had a really bad disease. I don't want to give too much information because it might give her details out. And she was pregnant at the same time. So she was stressing out in America, bad disease, pregnant, because she had gone to visit her husband back and forth. And I started going down the call tree for the State Department. So the public numbers for the Secretary of State, everyone down is on the internet. And I said, you know what, I just have to, so I started calling it one by one and saying, hey, this person's a U.S. citizen. She's born here. She has a disease. She's pregnant. We go to the press and it's going to make you look bad, you know? And the clients didn't want to go to the press because they want to keep it private. But I said, if we go to the press, it's going to look really bad. Nothing. Eventually filed a lawsuit and had to go through all that, spend all that money and time. But actually, we filed an emergency injunction. And within 24 hours of filing, the client got a call from the embassy and said, "Come right now, we'll give you your visa," because they don't want to deal with these lawsuits many times. So I don't do the lawsuits myself. I find another firm. Hopefully, I can help them. But that's the situation. So the guy went and did another medical. But this is before COVID-19, thankfully. But and got it in, and it would come. But that's the case. You will need to, if it's expired, you got to get a new visa and deal with all the headaches of the visa for the most part. Like it's the first time.
And there's no indication that if they've given you a visa and your application was approved once, that it's going to expedite it at all.
No, it could be always new. Who knows what the system's saying? Who knows what internal policy has changed? So it's always different. And it's a disaster. So many people right now have this exact scenario. When they they might have waited, 2 years on administrative processing. They may go and get hit by it again, which is going to be a nightmare. I mean, people are going to have like heart attacks when they get that letter. So it's something I'm really worried about.
Okay, so our last question for you is from Iran. Everyone wants to know, what's the deal? Can I come from Iran? Can I apply? Can I apply for my so-and-so? Can I apply for this or that? Or what is the status of immigration from Iran? What do you recommend if someone has family members or if someone is in Iran and is looking to apply to come to the United States?
In general, I mean, the only program that's officially shut down is the E2 investor program that was shut down last year. So you can't be a small scale investor in the United States. Everything is possible still. They're just massive delays, and some people might get denied. So I talked about people who are in SEPA getting denied. I have a client who has an EB-5 immigrant investor. The dad's invested millions of dollars in the United States to get a green card, and the embassy is just sitting on it, not issuing the visa. And so eventually he's going to get approved. I don't see a reason why I wouldn't, but I just expect delays and a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of worrying at night and lost opportunities. And it really gets to a point where most cases will still happen, but you got to see, is it worth waiting years? Like, what kind of opportunity will I lose? How much of my future am I going to give up with this idea that maybe I'll come to the United States? And although it goes against my business, think about alternatives, maybe Canada or maybe some other country that's more hospitable, but then later think about the United States, because their life is precious. I'm getting older, I have kids, and I see even when you're 20s, we don't realize how you think you're gonna live forever. I realized how much of my 20s I wasted doing nothing when we could have done so much more. I don't want you sitting there waiting for the U.S. Embassy to send you an appointment letter, because you don't know when that's gonna come. And even when you go to the interview, you don't know what they're gonna say or do, what mistakes are being made, or what stuff's gonna pop out you never would have thought about. So have your options open. And for a brother and sister of a U.S. citizen case, for example, that takes 10, 20 years anyways. Find alternatives that are faster, maybe, if they are. If you need to get out of Iran, which unfortunately with the state of Iran, it's a wise idea to get out, because it seems every time I talk about what's going on there, between the inflation and the government and instability, it's just a disaster to be living as an Iranian. Unfortunately, in Iran, even overseas is hard, but nowadays, in Iran especially, it's not a place you want to be.
One other just quick question, because we do also get a lot of people that ask, do you recommend waiting and seeing how the elections in the United States are going to turn out? If someone is going to apply for something, are there cases that you recommend, why don't you wait and see? Because maybe if the administration changes, the regulations would change. What are your thoughts on that?
No, you should. I gotta say, 99% of the time, no. You should file it. 1%, I have to see the case, because it might be some unique case I don't know about. But for the most part, it's just going to get worse. So the better to file now, because, for example, if they change the immigration laws and just completely shut down cases for brothers and sisters, which is one of the #1 goals of this administration, you can't file anything after that. But if you file it now, potentially the rules might say, well, if you had a case pending, you can still go, or we'll give you additional points in the new system. So you might as well start something now, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And a lot of the stuff about starting it now has no effect. So, because if you're overseas, there's a 2-part process for this green card. One is the immigration department accepting that you have a case, and then eventually an embassy interview to review your background. Most of that first part, although it's come harder and they hassle you more, that's still going, and that still takes time. So it's better to just get it started and then see what's happening there. Now, don't sell your house, don't quit your job, but get it started for the most part. Most cases, no point in waiting. And I've seen that disastrous thought of waiting and waiting. All of a sudden, 3 years go by, they could have had everything done by now because we are waiting for a new administration. For the most cases, that's not a wise idea.
Wow. Okay. So as if this isn't bad enough, we have to add to all of this, dealing specifically now with, I mean, any individual who's looking to come from a sanctioned country, we talk more to the Iranian American community because that tends to be the majority of individuals who contact us. And there's just a big overlap between, okay, what are my rights as an immigrant coming from Iran? And then how the sanctions regulations can impact that. Because obviously when you're filling out these documentations, you're giving information about what your job is, how much money you have in bank accounts, what assets you have in Iran. And when you come to the United States and you become a US person, though that information can trigger implications within the sanctions regulations. And so obviously the sanctions regulation is very broad, and we have people that are living in the United States who have questions about what they can do vis-a-vis Iran. We have US persons here, but specifically our conversation today is going to be geared more toward immigration issues. So I wanted to ask you, if you wanted to ask me, and what do you see, any questions that come up, issues that come up, sanctions related, and even because in the last few months, I've personally been getting a lot of questions from immigration attorneys seeking clarification as to what a U.S. person can do in Iran, what jobs you can still have with Iran, and whatnot. So, what comes up, or what's good information that people may not be aware of?
Well, that's such an important question. It's something that I want to, I was like, well, I should get into this in my consultation, explain to people. How does it work if someone is sending money from Iran to the U.S.? The difference between if that person is sending money as a U.S. person as opposed to if it's a foreign national. So let's say it's a person that is in the process of getting a green card. Should they transfer their money before becoming a U.S. person or after? Does that make a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the purposes of the sanctions regulations, a U.S. person is any person who is a legal permanent resident of the United States, a citizen of the United States, or physically in the United States, which is kind of interesting because you're not considered a U.S. person when it comes to, for immigration purposes, when you're a visa holder. Let's say you have a student visa and you're here. But once you come into the United States and you're physically present here, for the purposes of the sanctions, you're considered a U.S. person. And certain restrictions in terms of what you can do with Iran get triggered. When you're looking for money transmittal, if you are looking to immigrate and you have a process that your file is in place and it's being processed, I would recommend two things. One is definitely speaking to an OFAC attorney, and two, to a tax attorney, because there are steps that you can take that would really help you for tax purposes before coming to the United States. So before you even actually get your green card. And then for sanctions purposes, when you're not a US person, you basically are permitted to have a bank account in Iran. There are regulations that say for any property that you acquired prior to becoming a US person, so prior to getting your green card, you can sell that property. It could be personal property, it could be real property. So if you have a home, if your parents want to gift you something and you're right on the cusp of getting your green card, it's much better if they put it in your name before you get your green card, because once you get your green card, there's limitations in terms of what you can do with it. Now, US persons are allowed to receive money from Iran, so you could actually come here and have your family member send it for you. Then what is better for you to do, you have two options. One is either you can give someone the money, like a family friend or whatever, which is a lot of times what people do in Iran. They come here and that family friend sends it to them, and the documents we submit to the bank explain that this is a non-commercial personal remittance related to that individual's personal assets or the sale of real property and whatnot. The second option is if you have family members here that you can send it to while you're in Iran, you can also do that. That could help potentially with tax purposes. But the important thing is that having a bank account in Iran for a US person is not permitted. And if you're a green card holder, when you come to the United States, it's perfectly fine for you to come here and apply for a license from the Office of Foreign Assets Control, or OFAC, which is the part of the Department of Treasury that controls the sanctions regulations. And to say, I just got my green card and I want to close out these bank accounts. And then what we normally do is in the license application, list the properties just so that they're protected, but that's generally licensed, so you don't need a license for that. Yeah. And then you can get a license to close it. But that's an additional step. If you had given the money to your family members while you were still in Iran, then it becomes a non-US person sending a US person money, and that's generally licensed. So all you have to do is submit paperwork to the bank. So it's like a little nuance there, but it's easier. It just depends on what how much money you have. Do you have someone you can trust in Iran to give them the money? If not, you can come here and apply for a license and then close those bank accounts and have the money get transferred to you that way.
How long does it take to get a response about the licenses?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. It used to be within 6 months. Now it's all over the place. I've had licenses we get response for in 2 months. I have had licenses for 8 or 9 months, even basic transactions. So it's all over the place. And that's one of the reasons, unless it's really absolutely required by the law, if it can fall into a general license, it's much better to do it that way, because obviously when you're looking to transfer money from Iran and you're dealing with the unstable economy and the incredible fluctuation in the currency exchange rate, you don't want to be sitting around having at the mercy of the US government to issue a license for you to be able to transfer your assets. So if it is something that you can do through a general license, it ends up being much quicker because you can immediately do it. When something is generally licensed, that means you're allowed to engage in that activity. But as I'm sure you've seen in a lot of immigration cases, one of the biggest problems that exists when dealing with Iran and the United States and the transfer of assets is there's no direct banking relationship. So money cannot be sent from, let's say, Parsian Bank directly to Bank of America. And now it can't even be sent to a third country bank directly. Only through the banking system. It can only be sent through currency exchange brokers. And when money moves through a currency exchange broker, the source of money is not clear for the United States depository institutions or banks or the government. Because what happens is you or your family in Iran gives rials to a broker, and the broker then wires US dollars to you, exchanging the money from rials to dollars and sending it to you from a third country bank. And that the government here has no idea what that money is related to, where it's coming from. And then also your banks don't know. So the bank problem is not that difficult. We just have to prepare certain documents outlining the source and why it's legal and submit it to their compliance department. For immigration purposes, and actually this is something that I think it would be great if you talked about a little, is, you know, the sourcing part. When someone's applying for, let's say, an investment visa from Iran, EB-5, and they have to prove that the source of this money is legitimate, or they need to show that the money they're bringing is, how do they, I mean, that is a huge problem. And we do letters all the time for immigration attorneys explaining the currency exchange system, the lack of banking relationship. And we say, you can verify this information with the Office of Foreign Assets Control. But how much of a problem is that when you're applying for these types of
problem to an extent that majority of the cases Iranians trying to investigate is I don't even accept, because I know we're going to start the case, and then 2 years from now, because things are so loaded, they'll come back and say, well, we traced the funds. There's a gap in that we can't prove, and we can't give it. So like I had the last case I did for Iranian, it was one of the last E2 cases you could have done. And, you know, they went through Turkey, and the paperwork for Turkey was missing. And so and the client said, well, the Saudi won't give it to us. So we had to go back and forth until we forced him to give us something. And he gave us this paper, this wire receipt that was blurry. You couldn't even read it. And what happened actually is we were going to send that in, but the morning of sending it in, I got notification that they're going to shut down the E2 program. So we stopped it right there. But if there's one gap, so it has to be a line from beginning to end. If there's a gap in there, especially for the EB-5 program, which is the green card program, which is much more stricter than the E2 visa, which was what used to be for Iranians, a smaller scale investment. If there's a gap in there, they don't care. And it depends on officers. Some will pay attention, some won't. But I would not get a case where we can't clearly draw the line from beginning to end. And from Iran, it's almost impossible to do that nowadays. So unless they had money overseas in a bank account that was sitting there and they could source that fund to show how they earned that money, because it might be, or they might have a rich uncle in the U.S. who's giving them money and could source it that way. From Iran, I'm not optimistic on most cases being approved because they can always come back and find problems with source of funds because of the lack of banking relationship.
Right, and a lot of times there isn't the formal paper trail that we have here is just not available in Iran. They don't do it that way. So one of the things I always tell my clients is we need to be mindful of the paper trail often required on the US side. You know, giving an answer of like, well, we just don't have that in Iran doesn't really work. So think that through. Okay, if I'm selling this piece of land, you know, make very clear. And that, like, for example, another issue that comes up is a lot of land sales in Iran, the value that's entered in the official deed or document is different than the actual value of the sale. Yeah. And that can create a problem when you're saying I sold, you know, a house that was worth $500,000 and that's what I'm bringing, but the document only shows that the house was worth $250,000. That's problematic. So you need to foresee that and create the documents that can help you deal with that. Or because money is being moved through currency exchange brokers, and as you pointed out, a lot of times these SARA fees or brokers will say, well, I don't have a receipt, I'm not going to give you anything. Think of something, have something prepared from beforehand. This person, I'm giving this money, I'm sending it on behalf of this, and just have them put their stamp or whatever, something that can show that this transaction took place. Or if you're giving them a check, which brings us to another point. If you are giving them a check, you need to make sure that the bank on which that check is drawn is not on top. All Iranian banks are sanctioned. Certain banks you're permitted to do licensed activities, general and specific licensed activities with. Make sure that the banks involved are on the list that you're allowed to do those activities with, because that can be problematic. That can be an illegal conduct. That can trigger a problem. And these are things that if you could, it's much easier to know ahead of time and to plan and to think of the worst case scenario and to have the documentation than to have the transaction be carried out and then be stuck in a situation where you're trying to prove something that is difficult, not because you're trying to hide something, not because you're dishonest, but simply because we're dealing with two countries that are very different in so many different ways, but particularly their banking methods, their system, their bureaucracy, other than the fact that they're both very slow. That's the only similarity they share. And they don't have any direct relationships, so there's no way to corroborate what you say. So keep that in mind. I think it becomes very important.
Everything. So it's not one of those things, so I'm just going to tell my cousin who does this, that's usually weighed so many times Iran. You got to document everything, receipts, and the bank statements have to show how much money. You got to source and trace these. And as you said, I've had problems where they sold a house and they deposited a sum, and the sum didn't match what they said they would give. And it's like, well, these look like two different transactions, not the same one that's related. That's going to be problematic. How would someone know what these banks are that are semi-acceptable that you spoke about?
Well, there's different, so there's the general lists, and then there's like the list for nuclear proliferation. There's a list that they need to check to make sure the banks are not on each of those lists. I mean, that's if you were going to go look at OFAC's website and to search it. If not, you can always contact us and we can tell you too.
But it's probably every day. I get notifications where every day it's like a new OFAC notification that something's been added, something's been
designated. Exactly. In general, the popular government-owned banks like Melli, Mellat, Sepa, Sepa, those are all, you can absolutely under no condition work with them. It's just, and a lot of it is just funny because it's all related. And a lot of this is just knowing what the law says and making sure that you're abiding by it, even though it's, I don't want to say silly, but it really is. It's like the Iranian government has control over every aspect of everything. So that's what, whenever I say this to someone, they're like, well, all banks, I feel like all banks have to go through the central bank, and the central bank is obviously every government. And I'm like, well, you know what? We just need to do everything according to what the regulations say. And that is unfortunately.
Yeah. And I talk about that immigration too. I'm like, we're going through all this. Some is not going to make any sense, but it's just what we have to do. It's silly, some of it, but like, it's like, don't question me. It's just what we have to do. I know. So they're like, they want to challenge me. I'm like, I didn't make these up, and I wish it wasn't like this. Frank, I wish I didn't really have a job in this too.
They look at me and they're like, you don't know what's going on in Iran. I said, oh, trust me, I've been doing this for a really long time. I know what's going on, and I know how money moves, and I know what it looks like, and I know what it needs to look like. And again, I reiterate this when we work with banks or the government. It's like, well, these are just individuals caught in the middle of this nonsensical war about one administration, just changing laws and regulations, the other one doing the same. And these are two, governments that are going head to head. And in the middle, these are just people that are being caught. And you just need to protect yourself. And I always tell anyone that I can from the US government, like, these sanctions are actually impacting our own green card holders, our own citizens, legitimate good people coming here who would actually contribute to the betterment of this society, not the people you actually think that they're aimed at. But unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that other than just keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. So, how bad is it now compared to like last year or the year before when it comes to OFAC?
To be honest, everyone always asks that, and as much as changes in the laws that there were, the laws when it comes to an individual bringing their own assets here, laws pertaining to the sale of real property, laws pertaining to individuals coming and going, cash with themselves, that hasn't really changed. What's made it more difficult is on the Iranian side, because of the economic situation, they have become a lot less, they're much it becomes much more difficult to actually send your money out. There's
Yeah.
restrictions that are put on how much money you can withdraw from the bank, restrictions that are put on how you can work with currency exchange brokers. Currency exchange brokers are under a tremendous amount of scrutiny. And so the actual transmittal of funds has become more difficult. And obviously the culture of fear that has been really, really pushed, a fear of Iran that's been pushed by this current administration, has made banks here scrutinize transactions, which just means there's a higher probability of the transactions coming from Iran, because they're always coming from third countries, being flagged for suspicious activities. So it's just more important now than ever to make sure you have all of the documents and you submit them. But for the most part, knock on wood, we don't have issues. Our clients are bringing money, but we're doing everything like very much by the book. Everything's reported properly. We're advising the clients, send money through third country bank, don't accept money here from inside the United States.
Could we talk about that, the dangers of that? Because a lot of people will say, I'll give my buddy and he'll go deposit the money in the account here.
So according to the United States government, not what's in the regulation, but in a frequently asked question, the government responded that those types of internal deposits are actually illegal. So you're allowed to receive family money from Iran. You're allowed to sell personal assets and receive the funds from Iran, but it has to come from a third country bank. What John is referring to is what the U.S. government refers to as a hawala, whereas someone in Iran gives somebody money within a family member, and then they get the equivalent of U.S. dollars here. So it's this informal money transmittal that happens between individuals versus going through the banking system. And that, in the eyes of the U.S. government, is not permitted. And it's just dangerous because unless you know that person and you're 100% sure where both sides of the money is going to get used for, a lot of people use this as a vehicle for money laundering. So in addition to sanctions law, it triggers money laundering laws.
Yeah.
So I would highly avoid doing that. And then also for USCIS purposes, it's going to be really difficult to show source of money if your buddy here in the United States is giving it to you and you're saying it's related to the sale of property in Iran. It becomes very, very complicated. And if that officer knows enough about the sanctions regulations, they would know that that method of money transfer is illegal and they shouldn't accept it.
You know, in the administration updated their handbook for citizenship and naturalization, and one of the specific things they updated in this 10 update list that they mentioned is sanctions violations. And this was about 3 or 4 months ago. And when I read that, I was like, they're going to focus on this. And the last one wrote sanctions violations. And that means Iran, and 99% of the time Iran. Not many Myanmar people or Burma people coming at us, or maybe Sudan sometimes, but this is in Iran. So, you know, just because it hasn't happened in the past doesn't mean it's not going to happen in the future. When we see the writing on the wall, we already know with the administration. I mean, they assassinated a top general without giving a damn. So we know how they're dealing with stuff. And so just be careful. And, you know, sometimes it means not filing for citizenship. Sometimes, I know people are always in a rush to file for citizenship because they want to be able to travel easier and stuff. But sometimes filing for citizenship is not appropriate. And that's one of the things we talk about during consultation is right now is not a good time for you. Let's think about this again later if that's the case. You know, you got to see what's appropriate for your individual case.
Yeah, and I know we're sort of running out of time. I just want to say one other thing because this comes up a lot is that you have to remember that the U.S. sanctions say that a U.S. person is not permitted to work in Iran. So if you get a green card, you're a U.S. person and you come here, certain winding down activities is permitted. So if you own a business, certain activities related to winding that business down are permitted. But for the most part, the safest thing to do is to apply for a license that explains, because once you're just coming here, you're perfectly within your right to, you know, have shares and stocks in Iran, you know, have businesses in Iran, have rental income in Iran. All of those things are illegal for U.S. persons. So once you first get here, if you were to just apply for a license, asking for time to wind down those activities, asking for a time period, they will grant those licenses for the most part. I mean, you can never say anything is for certain these days. And working in Iran is not permitted. So we have right now, that was one of the issues that came up with the whole student visa things where they were saying to send them back and to take online courses, even certain types of online courses and education courses is not permitted for people within Iran, even if you're a US person. So even I am a citizen of the United States, I can't go and do my job in Iran because technically I'm within Iran, I'm in actually the Iranian soil, and I cannot be engaging in business or working. So it's little things like this that can create problems. So it's just really, really important to educate yourself. Do you have any parting words for anybody just if you are confused, disheartened listening to this, anything to say that at least give them some comfort before they go.
One note of what you said, for like a marriage-based case, we have to document that they're a real couple, and one way is joint bank accounts. And if you're a U.S. citizen, you come back and say, oh, my joint bank account's in Iran I have with my spouse, that could be problematic. You're going on the record admitting a crime. So you have to know how serious that is. But, you know, the best thing to do is consult with an attorney. If not, me, just
together. We had a client that was in Iran, married an Iranian national. He's a U.S. person, and they wanted to buy a house together, or the father-in-law wanted to gift him a house. But even gifting a house, because he's a U.S. person, he needs a license to accept that. So it's little things like that. And, you know, before I did realize even a customs officer, a customs agent wasn't as well versed in the sanctions law. So a lot of times they wouldn't catch on things. Everyone is learning about OFAC and sanctions these days, everybody. So they are aware of it. And definitely when it comes to immigration, I feel like USCIS is much more careful about it. So definitely just understand your rights. And it's just the more you know before you start a process, the better it's going to be.
Yeah, that's education. So, you know, always consult with different people, not just me, or consult with different attorneys, because everyone has different levels of education and understanding. You know, it might be some places where I don't know about certain areas. I mean, if someone's coming from, you know, from Sudan, for example, I don't know all the nuances of a Sudanese case. So you should consult with different people, see what kind of experience they have. You know, there's a lot of videos online even talk about this. Now, there's bad information, there's good information. That's why we have to go to different sources and then balance it out, who's more trustworthy and seems more competent. And a lot of these resources are online. We can study yourself as well. That's just the way to go. I do have a YouTube page for the JQK Law Firm. I have hundreds and hundreds of videos there. I do a live Q&A where people ask questions as well every week. So check that out. And if they wanted to contact me, my email is info@jqqlaw.com. It's better to email me than to call me. To be honest, I don't pick up phone calls from Iran. If I see a Iranian number, I don't pick it up, because usually they're going to yell at me for some reason. So I've stopped answering those calls. It's always going to be angry at me for some reason that I didn't take. So I just stopped taking phone calls. Email is the way to go. We can take care from there. But
thank you so much. We're going to definitely put all of your firm information in the post. We'll send you a link of this. And I just want to thank you again. I know we did, as you were talking, I just got a flashback. We did a podcast years ago. Years ago. I don't know how many years exactly, but I want to say 6 years. I don't even know.
5 years ago. Yeah.
Okay, I like yours better because less time passes. But thank you again for your time, and thank you for all the great information you provide for the community. And I hope everyone found this useful, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day with all the not so great news that we gave you, but at least we gave you resources that we can handle some of these problems. So thank you again, and have a wonderful day, and we hope to have you back on again soon.
Thanks, Mehrnoush.
Thank you.